Under normal circumstances, people usually say goodbye at the station and on the platform beside the train, with last words of wishes and reassuring farewells. We said goodbye on the night of 26 September at Tottenham Court Road, one of the busiest junctions on the London Underground. The terrible noise of the trains drowned out our words as if we were speaking in whispers. The human maelstrom twisted us like splinters. Of course, this was not the place to say goodbye to people who might never meet again in their lives. I hugged Francisca and Milan and disappeared into the crowd. Fred was not present. He was already with the Czechoslovak unit somewhere in France, and God knows what happened to him at that moment. Under these circumstances, I said goodbye to my family. Francisca and Milan took the metro to the northwest end of the huge city. They settled in the neighborhood of Edgware. The house stood in a quiet, secluded corner of a former park with a lake. The landlady had evacuated. She was driven out of the house by raids. For us, the woman's flight helped us to find a new home, as our old house had been destroyed during the bombing. After midnight, I traveled from Marylebone Station via Sheffield to Liverpool. About 10 o'clock, we were on the spot. We were put up in a room for transit passengers for the night. Great adventures awaited us. And to help my holy memory, I made brief notes each day. 28 September 1944, just for fun, if only so that no one would say later that I had done nothing to return my excellent camera, which, by the way, I thought was already missing. I went to the harbor office and asked, with a written confirmation, for the return of my camera. On our arrival from France to Liverpool on 7 July 1940, when unloading the camera and a map were taken away from us, on which Fred and I had jokingly plotted the course of the Mohammed Ali El Kibir with the help of a small bustle, knowing the speed of the ship. It was exactly 7 minutes, and after 4 years of storage in a huge warehouse, the clerk of the office politely handed me my valuable machine, which was in perfect condition. The card was not returned to me. It had evidently been destroyed. The course we had plotted for the ship was so accurate that a naval officer who happened to be looking at our chart was quite surprised and took it away. On this map, it was clearly visible what tricks our ship resorted to in order to avoid meeting with submarines, which were full of them in the Mediterranean Sea. I took many valuable documentary pictures with my camera later, on my way to the front. At 3 p.m., I walked down the gangway to the Duchess of Bedford. This is a large passenger ship of 18,000 tons displacement. It has 2 pipes. The ship's engines are oil-fueled. It's hard to describe the size of this ship's pipe. There probably wouldn't be 10 men to put their arms round it. The ship is intended for military transport, and today it carries 4,300 people from different military units traveling to Palestine, Tehran, the Far East, and Central Africa. The passenger list includes us, 13 Czechoslovak officers bound for the Soviet front. 29 September. Duchess of Bedford is still anchored at the breakwater. Next to it is the Mauretania, a colossus twice the size of ours. In June 1943, it ferried a Czechoslovakian unit from the Middle East to England. It was a quiet golden autumn evening. The moon appeared in the sky. The celestial yoke was almost perfectly round and glittered like a Christmas tree toy. The waves splashed caressingly against the side of the ship, and the reflection of the moon rocked on them like a boat. Leaning against the deck rail, I looked in the direction where London was. Instantly, London flashed into my imagination like a screen. The illuminated Birkenhead, lying on the other side of the River Mersey, opposite Liverpool, reminded me of 7 July 1940. At that time, past us, refugees from France, who arrived on the Mohammed in England, boated cheerful tourists returning home, and simply waved to us, as if our tragedy did not touch them at all. 30 September. About 7 o'clock in the morning, 2 small tugs, Bison and Wapiti, came up to us and dragged our ship on ropes from the breakwater. As soon as the Duchess of Bedford was far enough from the shore, her big propellers started up. By 8 o'clock, we began to move away from the breakwater, and little by little we got into the open sea. By 11 o'clock, the English shores had disappeared in the mist of Liverpool Bay. With them, something tender and personal left me. It was as if I had lost something when I said goodbye to the land. I had thought that everything personal was over at Tottenham Court Road, but on deck I realized that it was not. In hard times, when human bonds are severed, longing triumphs. We are traveling in a fast convoy with 4 other vessels. The seagulls have disappeared, except for a few, the hardiest ones. The sea has turned from gray to green, then dark green. From 2 o'clock in the afternoon until darkness fell, we sailed along the coast of Wales and southwest England. In the afternoon off Bristol, several more vessels joined us. Now in our convoy of 16 vessels, most of them military transports of displacement from 10 to 18,000 tons. In the evening, the ships are lit on board lights. White, red, green. The sea gradually acquires a greenish-blue color. In the afternoon, there was a drill. It will be held until special order twice a day. 1 October. In the morning, the shores of southern Ireland showed themselves. We marched along them until lunchtime. We were given red electric lights to our life belts. There was a slight swell on the sea. It warmed up considerably in the evening. We are heading southwest, at times changing to west, south, or southeast, constantly threatened by submarines. The moon has risen. It's now a full disk. Ship's convoy, flooded with moonlight, silently, like ghosts, glide along the sea surface. This picture makes an enchanting impression. One sailor told me that the depth of the sea below us is 4,000 meters. At dinner, coupons were distributed for rations, which included cigarettes, pipe tobacco, chocolate, and soap. 3 October. It has warmed considerably. The women on the ship are sunbathing and walking around in shorts and light summer blouses. The men take off their warm uniforms. The speed has increased to 14 knots, that is 25 kilometers per hour. Tomorrow night we must sail through the Strait of Gibraltar. We are gradually approaching Africa and the Mediterranean Sea from the west. The greenish coloring of the sea has changed to an ultramarine blue. At 16 o'clock we are about 300 kilometers west of South Portugal. Coming now on a southwest course, we shall soon begin to turn eastwards towards Gibraltar. There is no place to fall on the upper deck. Everyone is sunbathing. Only when it was completely dark did a light breeze blow. I sit on the upper deck and indulge in reminiscences. Next to me sit Staff Captain Patera and Captain Guido Cotiara. I think they are thinking as much as I am about what has been and what will be. Suddenly, the ships of our convoy gave a honk. In the distance, an illuminated ship, evidently neutral, sailed past us. 4 October. At 8:30 in the morning, 5 birds came from somewhere, rested on the mast, and flew away. In the direction of their flight lay Spain. I think they were pigeons. They had to fly at least 300 kilometers to reach land. The sea is now a deep blue color. No trace of green. From today, soldiers are allowed to wear tropical uniforms, shorts, and short-sleeved shirts. The weather is like our hot summers. About 8 o'clock, we change course substantially. We are now sailing straight east, towards Gibraltar. By evening, the order of movement changes. The convoy narrows. Part of the fast destroyers are sent to the end of the convoy, which now that we leave the Atlantic Ocean, the most vulnerable to attack by submarines. At 18.13, one of the destroyers fires 2 depth charges in front of us. The crews of the guard ships are visibly worried. By 8 o'clock in the evening, on the left on the course of the convoy appear lights. We are approaching the strait, on the African coast of Spanish Morocco. The lights of lighthouses are also beginning to flash. I bought 2 small brooch anchors in the mess hall. I will send them by sea mail to Francisca in Milan. Francisca still wears this brooch on his suit as a tried and tested symbol of faith and hope in hard times. 5 October. The time of passage through Gibraltar I slept through. The Duchess of Bedford sailed through the strait without stopping. In the morning from the upper deck, I saw the friendly, charming, calm Mediterranean Sea. the blue sky harmonizing splendidly with the darker blue of the water and the shining sun. It all created a joyful mood. Everything on this sea and on its shores breathes cheerful carefreeness and sets the mood for relaxation and doing nothing. The picturesqueness of the landscape and the whole atmosphere contribute to this. The blue sky is the embodied joy of life. In the evening, the port of Oran appears on the horizon. The ship's radio informs that we are passing the place of the first landing of the Allies in Africa, which took place on the 8th of November 1942. Our Duchess of Bedford also took part in the landing operation. A British officer, a participant in this operation, gave us a short report on this Allied event. The rocky African coast, with the spurs of the high Atlas clearly outlined against the bright sky. 6 October. On Friday morning about 8 o'clock, we were welcomed by Algiers. The splendor of the white buildings towering over the harbor caught the eyes, though we were sailing 10 miles from the coast. The African shores, with their bare cliffs falling steeply to the sea, were clearly visible. It was getting cooler. It's quickly becoming dusk. The western sky is colored pink. It reminds me of something else. In the morning, we will be at the level of Bizerte. On Tuesday, 10 October, we should reach our goal of Alexandria or Port Said. 7 October. In the morning at 9:30, we sailed past 2 rocky steep islets, which on some charts are listed as the Isles de la Galette, and on others as the Fratelli Brothers Islets. The second name was given to them, apparently because they are side by side and look out of the sea like twins. I made sketches of them. Beyond Bizerte, the shores disappear in a thickening fog. Visibility is about 4 miles. The atmosphere is like a greenhouse. At 12:50, we leap behind the islet of Sombra. The tops of the cliffs are lost in the clouds. At 14:45, a quail perched on the ledge of one of the pipes. Maybe he got lost in the fog, or maybe he was tired. Quail are not considered hardy birds. At 15:20, there were 6 explosions of depth bombs fired by the guard ships. At 5:30 p.m., the Pantelleria surfaced on our left. We passed 6 miles from the island, where on 11 July 1943, the Allies in the long campaign to capture Italy won the first victory. The eastern side of the island is a high mountainous massif. All these mountainous islands look out to sea with almost sheer cliffs. They look terrible. It's eerie to see this desert in the middle of the sea. At midnight, we move the hands forward 1 hour. 8 October. We sail all day with complete invisibility of the land. At 10 o'clock, we pass 100 kilometers to the left of the island of Malta, which the British sailors held at the cost of huge sacrifices, repelling fierce attacks of fascist aircraft. By doing so, they largely retained the Mediterranean Sea for themselves. Civil defense and the heroic resistance of all the inhabitants of Malta also played an important role in this. In case of capture of the island, the scales of war in southern Europe would have tipped significantly in favor of Hitler's Germany and fascist Italy. The strategic communications of the Allies, leading through the Mediterranean Sea to the Middle East, India, and Africa, would have been lost. The road to the south would have been open to Hitler. Between Tunis and Derna, we sail the shortest route, leaving Little Sirte and Big Sirte on the right. From time to time, flying fish about half a meter long emerge from the sea. They suddenly jump to the surface and, fluttering their short bony wings, fly over the water for several hundred meters at a speed of up to 100 kilometers per hour and then disappear into the waves. Dolphins appear. They swim in packs and behave as if they are flirting with the sea and the ship. During lunch, again a series of explosions of depth charges. In the afternoon, the radio reported that the final destination of the ship would be Alexandria. 9 October. In the morning, the African coast again appeared on the horizon, sailing 5 miles from the shore to Derna. In the rising sun, the steep, bare slopes are plastic against the desert. At noon, we are at the level of Derna. The tower of the mosque is clearly visible. The pendulum of desert warfare swung one way or the other, Wavell in December 1940 from Egypt went 1,000 kilometers to the west. Rommel in March 1941, to the east. Ritchie in November 1941, again to the west. And Rommel in July 1942, again to the east. And always the way lay through Derna and Benghazi. Towards evening we passed Tobruk, which was out of sight. Involuntarily I remembered the living and dead soldiers of the Czechoslovakian unit in the Middle East, which under the command of Colonel Karel Klapalik participated in the successful defense of an encircled fortress in the autumn of 1941 under harsh conditions. The Duchess of Bedford and another ship of the convoy separated from the general formation and headed towards Alexandria under the protection of a destroyer. Along the ship floats a multitude of jellyfish. They resemble large yellow-green washing sponges. In the evening, we return the red lights. We are probably out of the high danger zone by now. Tomorrow, English money will be exchanged for Egyptian money. It's a scalding heat all day. Packing. 10 October. In the morning, the surface of the sea has an unusual appearance. It is remarkably calm, as if watered with oil. A light breeze tries to create a slight ripple, but the impression of lazy water remains. The closer we get to Alexandria, the more transparent the emerald green of the water becomes. At 10 o'clock, the highest contours of the harbor appear in the distance. From 2 o'clock in the afternoon, for nearly 2 hours, we sail past harbor buildings, private and merchant ships of all kinds, past a burnt-out steamer and a Greek destroyer. An aircraft carrier lurks among the many large and small vessels. At about 4 p.m. we finally dock, but go ashore, however, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. Duchess of Bedford has thus completed her voyage. Mohammed Ali El Kiber, which had taken us on board at Sète after the defeat of France and brought us safely to Liverpool, was torpedoed off the coast of Ireland by a German submarine on the return journey and sank during the night with most of the crew. From the high deck of the ship I looked down at the grubby Egyptian boys. They deftly catch English pence and cigarettes in the water and on the shore, which are thrown to them from the ship. An Egyptian fat policeman with a fez on his head chases them away, but the boys come running out from behind him again. The policeman rewards them with kicks and hits them with the butt of his rifle, but they respect only the English military police. Here one of the boys has jumped into the dirty, oily water and is waiting for a coin to be thrown to him, for which he will dive to the bottom. When he saw the policemen approaching, he dived into the water and hid under a floating board. Only his brown fingers with light-colored nails were visible on the board. In a minute the boy came out of the water, and at the same moment the policeman jumped up to him. A terrible blow followed. The thin boy went down like a hamstring. When he came to his senses, he stood up quietly and staggered off somewhere. The blackout has been canceled. These are the first lights since 1940. The sight of them in the harbor and on the ships is pleasing to the eye. The evening is warm, about the same as ours in the middle of August. In Alexandria, 11 October. At 7:45 a.m., I set foot on solid ground again. I took one last look at the Duchess of Bedford, whose deck loomed high above us, and stepped into Africa. Already in the harbor, before we got into the cars, a newspaper seller had cheated one of the members of our group out of 50 piastres. We drove through the city to the seaside campsite Ibish, where the 11th Czechoslovak Infantry Battalion, Eastern, was acclimatizing after months of desert life, in the Palestinian Gedera, and in the most ghastly of all deserts by the Dead Sea. The sand here is special, deep, slippery. It is very hard to walk on it, and we had a lot to learn in order to somehow adapt to walking on it, even though we were to stay in the camp for a short time. The transit camp is situated 5 miles east of the town in the desert, which here passes directly into the sea. Everywhere you look there is sand, hot sand. Around the camp grow in groups thin palm trees tilted to the ground, leaden with ripening dates. We were literally enveloped by the heat. Sweat, without ceasing, streamed down our faces. The August sun was no match for the October sun here. While I was walking between the tents to the warehouse for shorts, My canvas trousers became wet through and through in a minute. We got straw hats, mosquito nets, and electric torches. We took the tram into town in groups. Right on the street, a child, probably not even 4 years old, sleeps on some rags. He's lying all alone. Flies are all over his face, which hasn't been washed for a long time, covered with various sores. In another street, a woman sits on the ground and stares dumbly, with a completely indifferent look in front of her. A baby sleeps on her lap. The corners of his eyes are festering. He probably has trachoma. And again the flies swarm. The mother doesn't even move to ward them off. Why not? I gave her £1. But what does £1 mean in this sea of poverty? The Arab infants I saw mostly sleeping were without signs of life, pus in their eyes and clouds of flies on their faces. Those I saw no longer looked like human beings. Poverty, terrible poverty. It is impossible to buy anything without knowing the local customs. The first price offered is always unaffordably high. By haggling, you can bring down the price by 1/3 or even more. What is the real price of the goods after that? We try to be extremely vigilant, not to let ourselves be deceived in any way, but we do not succeed very well. I'm walking along a quiet street. Suddenly, a flock of kids burst out of somewhere and right at me, a man in military uniform. Each of them has a bundle of newspapers under his arm and another one in his hands. They waved the newspapers vigorously, surrounded me from all sides, shouting something at me. The impression is as if the war is over, no less. I bought a lot of newspapers in the hope of learning as much as possible from them, and even overpaid the boys. When I looked at the number, it turned out that the papers had been published 6 months ago. Quite understandably, the boys had already evaporated. Their deception, however, made me laugh and put me in a good mood. I had dinner at the European chic restaurant Monsignor with music and dancing. But I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. I wanted to experience the real, fake Alexandria at night. Not far from the Monsignor sat an old woman. In front of her on the bare stones of the pavement lay a child. A fat policeman began to kick the dozing woman with his foot, and people passed by as if they did not notice anything. In an abandoned alleyway in the darkness, I shone my torch on something. It was children, little boys, huddled against the wall. Shrunken from the night cold, they slept in a row against the wall. You couldn't tell where their heads were and where their feet were. Having seen Alexandria at night, I hurried to my own, under the roof. In the impenetrable darkness of the Egyptian capital, I managed to do it with great difficulty. 13 October. Today at 5:45 p.m., we leave by train for Haifa. There is so much gold in the bazaar on the Golden Street that one can't even look at it. In open small workshops under a single awning, goldsmiths melt and emboss gold, giving it noble shapes right in front of all passers-by. You can't even believe that there is so much gold around, pure gold. A similar picture would be in Tehran, with the only difference being that there they sell silver instead of gold. I bought Frantiska a small bracelet made of just hearts. It cost me almost all my cash. There is plenty of fruit everywhere. There are medlars and pomegranates, but fruit is expensive. We load up when it's dark. The road goes across the Nile Delta, through a knot of rivers and rivulets. The Nile up to Cairo flows as a single mighty stream, but further north it scatters in a fan and falls into the sea all along the coast from Alexandria to Port Said. The triangle of Cairo, Alexandria, Port Said, whose base at the sea reaches 200 kilometers, and whose height from the sea to Cairo is about 150 kilometers, occupies an area of more than 30,000 square kilometers. It is the most fertile area along the course of the river, and is harvested 2 or 3 times a year. The whole of Moravia would fit in the Nile Delta. At 23 hours, we crossed the main branch of the Nile at Tanta Station, from Egypt via Baghdad to Tehran. 14 October. At Al Tel El Kibir Station, situated in the Delta, we arrived at 6:45 and waited 5 hours for our train to be prepared for another track. There are poor clay shacks of the fellahs all round and a little hilly country with cornfields. The sediments give the soil of the delta a pale gray, clayey appearance. The clay is felt in everything. The trees lack freshness, gray-green like wilted leaves. The trees are gnarled and stunted, lacking slenderness and majesty. Even the trees here are squashed, as if they too have been bent by the poverty you see around them. And here is a rich Arab traveling to Mecca. He is accompanied by wives, children, and a whole procession with music. I wanted to photograph them, but the Arab, dressed in European style, angrily forbade photographing his wives. Around lunchtime we traveled onwards. At 1 o'clock we arrived at Ismailia, whence a second group was leaving for the east. General Satoris, Colonel Verzashik, and 30 officers. They have not been issued tropical uniforms and look very weary. At 2 o'clock we approach the Suez Canal and drive 5 or 6 meters along this important waterway. All around is bare desert, devoured by the sun. At 14.30 on a temporary bridge, we cross the road along the canal, only from the other side. The width of the canal is 150 to 200 meters. We overtake 2 ships sailing towards the Mediterranean Sea. The view of the canal from the desert side is not attractive at all. It seems that a pipe is slowly moving along the unseen sandy plain. Yes, a chimney with smoke billowing from it. The other parts of the ship are not visible. They are hidden by the banks of the canal. The lone chimney in the midst of thousands of years of silence of the ancient world makes one chuckle. After lunch in El Cantar, we set off across the desert. Lieutenant Shaker, who knows these places, says that this is the most desolate of all deserts, as there is a special kind of sand, which makes traveling very difficult. In the hot, shivering air one can scarcely see Mount Sinai. In the evening we were still in this terrible desert, but soon felt the approach of the sea. We pass by oases and caravans, and there are many date palms with ripening fruit all around. There are 7 of us in the compartment. Nobody knows how we will be accommodated for the night. 15 October. At midnight we were in Gaza. When it dawned, we were already passing by cultivated, well-tended fields. They were then replaced by vineyards and olive groves. We arrived in Haifa at 7 o'clock in the morning. The first impression is pleasant. The houses here are stone, solid, and there are many modern buildings in the city. After Egypt, cleanliness and order are striking here. We take out tropical helmets. When they gave them to us, I was struck by this belated favor. It is already the middle of October, but now I was grateful in my heart for such care. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon we got into the Studebakers. There are 13 of us. We are not superstitious, but this number is considered fatal. We drive the trucks further east, past kibbutzim, Jewish cooperative farms, past orange and lemon groves, and endless vegetable gardens full of beautiful vegetables. Irrigation systems are everywhere. The soil in the vegetable gardens is well fertilized and free of weeds. As we drove by, peasants were coming out into the fields. They were walking along singing songs. After crossing the Palestinian-Lebanese and Palestinian-Syrian borders, poverty was again evident, poor houses made of clay. Along the borders we saw watchtowers with armed British police posts. As it was explained to us, they guard the border kibbutzim here against attacks from neighbors. The mountain range in the north is mostly bare, with only occasional patches of young pine trees. Closer to the Jordan, the terrain becomes poorer, and the number of kibbutzim decreases. Apart from 2 serpentine mountains and the heat and heavy air in the hollow downstream of the river, we experienced no difficulties on the way to Jordan. The main mountains of the wild Palestinian desert, about 1,000 meters high, stretch between Area and Jerusalem, framing from the west the suffocating long depression at the Dead Sea, fortunately situated about 70 kilometers south of our route. And this is the area of sizzling heat British command identified in November 1940 the 11th Czechoslovak Infantry Battalion for acclimatization and completion of combat training. This area lies 395 meters below the surface of the Mediterranean Sea. Some soldiers from Klopalek's unit despaired at the sight of the dead, desiccated terrain in the middle of the bare, grassless mountains, with only the light yellow of sand and rocks around them, and did not believe that it was possible to live here. Afterwards, however, they got used to the dry desert air and gradually learned to move over the sand without much difficulty. At 2:30 in the morning, we crossed the Jordan River. Its surface level here is 200 meters below sea level, and with it the Palestinian-Jordanian border, which stretches from north to south parallel to the river. The Jordan flows lazily. Its water is yellowish-green, a kind of unhealthy color. In the river valley, large signs about the malaria epidemic were insistently drawing attention. At 13.55, we are again at zero altitude and serpentine climbing on a plateau in the form of completely empty mountains, about 1,000 meters high, with sheer cliffs below and above us. When the sun is at its zenith, not a single living thing is visible. Even the Bedouins themselves hide at this time in tents and small caves that abound along the road. Herds of goats and sheep graze under the supervision of sleepy shepherds. Donkeys with heavy loads on their backs are occasionally seen. It is stifling and terribly hot. The air seems to sway. In the sun, it is a good 50 degrees. How would we get there without tropical helmets? At 4 o'clock, we passed Irbid. The soldiers of the garrison are in Jordanian army uniforms. At 5 o'clock, we passed Mafraq and settled down for the night in the desert. We are already traveling along the route of the oil pipeline laid in the desert sands. From Haifa to Jordan, 80 kilometers, and from there to Mafraq, 70. Is that all? However, distance is not everything here. The first night in the desert, the real desert. Who can describe the beauty of such a night, when you can see nothing and yet you can see so much? Fascinated, I stood near the tent in the middle of the amazing silence and looked at the starry sky, at the captivating sky above the desert. After a moment's hesitation, I decided to go a little away from the camp, just a few meters, so as not to get lost. But step by step, and soon the camp disappeared from my sight. I stood alone in the desert. I don't know how the locals know how to walk in such a way that the sand doesn't rustle, what kind of shoes they wear, but suddenly they were near me, squeezed me from 3 sides. Only the white teeth and the metal of their daggers glimmered in the darkness. I was terrified. I could only say 2 words out of fear. I am an Englishman. Well, not well, but I said what my instinct told me to say. Calling myself a Czech would have done me a hell of a lot of good. Those men instantly vanished like spirits. Who were they? Bedouin brigands or a sentinel? The next day in the evening, the English guides advised us not to camp somewhere out of the way. Otherwise, they said, we might not wake up stabbed with a dagger. Sunset in the desert plays all the colors of the rainbow, but the predominant colors are orange and yellow of all shades. Not pink like ours. The opposite side of the horizon is painted in colors from pastel to bluish-violet. The night sky here is bluish transparent, which gives it a magical captivation. A true Oriental night. Twilight only lasts for maybe only about 20 minutes, and then it's immediately dark. The colors changed rapidly, and I hasten to describe their palette. 16 October, rising at 4, breakfast at 5, departure at 6. Enchanting sunrise. A fiery solar ball in a golden halo somehow immediately jumped out from behind the sandy horizon. We set off on the road. Soon the clay-yellow desert is replaced by a black, stony one. Sharp basalt stones up to 50 centimeters high densely cover a huge territory 500 kilometers long and 400 wide. This is the Syrian desert. It is located on the border of 4 states: Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. The whole of Czechoslovakia would fit in this area. This black stony sea under the searing rays of the sun casts a matte sheen and resembles a snake. It's all awe-inspiring. Between the rocks here and there you can see yellowish sand. The English sergeant accompanying us said that there is life in this wild desert and that even gazelles live here. Is it possible? The gazelles must have something to eat, and above all something to drink. When we stopped, I tried to find an answer to this question. And I did. Between the stones and the sand I found some vegetation, some black bushes with leaves. On them were green berries the size of lingonberries. I squeezed one of them. Juice spurted from it. Here it was, stored moisture for the thirsty gazelles. The black desert seems to have no end. We've been traveling for 4 hours. We've long passed the transit station. And still we go, go. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we finally arrive at another transit station. Settled in the open air, our journey is over for the day. We're still in Jordan. Our journey today has been along the Syrian border. It's still about 150 kilometers to the Iraqi border. The heat is exhausting. To understand what 50 degrees of heat is like in the desert, let me give you an example. I was sitting with a tropical helmet on my head in the back of a Studebaker under an awning. The tarp only slightly swayed in the headwind. I didn't notice the narrow slit in the tarpaulin, and the soldier from the escort suddenly said that I had a strip of burnt skin on the back of my head and that it wasn't safe. We met the second night in the desert. I put the camp bed near the tent and, covered with a woolen blanket, lay on my back and looked up at the starry sky. It was full of sparkling stars. The shining of the stars in these parts of the world with the clear air is like the luster of precious stones. The fresh caressing breeze seemed indescribably gentle. Soon I fell asleep. I don't know at what hour of the night I woke up, but it was pitch black all around. There was someone standing over me, a large black mass breathing hotly in my face. I moved and grabbed for my gun. The black thing bounced away, and I heard it rush away. When I recounted the incident at breakfast in the morning, the English surgeon laughed. "It was a wild donkey that took an interest in you," he explained. "A brother-in-law sees a brother-in-law from afar," was the joke around. We left at 8 o'clock in the morning, rather late in these parts. By midday we had crossed the Jordanian-Iraqi border. The desert structure had changed. The stony desert changed to a sandy clay desert of light gray color, with small pebbles and a surface as flat as a table. In the afternoon we passed a short hilly section. There are no high mountains with sharp tops in this area. Flatlands are more common here. We pass several camel herds. At the end of the day we set up camp and prepared for the night. It was the third night in the desert. We had traveled 210 kilometers. We still had 518 kilometers to go to Baghdad. 18 October. We rose at 2 o'clock in the morning, and at 4 o'clock, still in complete darkness, we set off. Before us is a plain, endless, and tedious. Our average speed is 50 kilometers an hour. We are thrown from side to side in the body. Now and then mirages appear in front of us. Suddenly, in the desert you see water. It lives, plays with light, shimmers. You see a lot of trees near this water. It spills over a great distance. The sight of the water refreshes us, but immediately the fatigue of the false play of distances begins to torment us. The picture of the oasis seemed to be running away from us playfully, and there was no way we could reach that lake of vegetation. What the hell is this? I thought, seeing that the water wasn't getting any closer. There was no devilishness here, just a bizarre reflection in the desert. Gradually we begin to realize that it's all a mirage, that nature has fooled us. The picture of the oasis in the desert kept appearing and appearing before our eyes. It was like a watercolor painted on a wet canvas. Blurred edges, some strange combination of dark tones and generalization of details. Gazelles would not drink this water. Before reaching El Fallujah on the Euphrates, we met a camel caravan. It was coming from somewhere from the vast expanses of the desert and was heading for Baghdad. There is something majestic in the slow, swaying movement of the camels, which walk one after the other with their heads proudly raised, as if they realize that they cannot do without them in the desert. The calm that has reigned here for millennia has accustomed both these animals and the people sitting on them to stoic calmness. The caravan paid no attention to us. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we entered the fairy tale city of the 1001 Nights. We were greeted by dust and dirt, as well as refreshments, and a well-deserved rest at the transit camp. From Haifa to Baghdad in 4 days from 15 to 18 October, we traveled 1,200 kilometers, of which 1,000 kilometers across the desert. 19 October. Baghdad is a typical Eastern city. It appeared before us in all its unattractiveness. In open little restaurants, men were lying on straw mats. Women in the streets are wrapped in black burqas. In public places, they are not to be seen at all. After 7 p.m., we left by train for Basra. Basra is located in Iraq, 700 kilometers from Baghdad, on a narrow wedge, squeezed on all sides by Iranian territory. 2/3 of the way the railway runs between the Euphrates and the Tigris across Mesopotamia, then a bridge over the Euphrates and on along its right bank. Of this road I have nothing in my memory. I slept most of the way, and the journey was not pleasant. The fine dust, raised by the train, penetrated into the carriage through all the cracks and covered everything inside with a gray coating. It was impossible to fight against it. In the morning, we found a thick layer of dust on everything and in everything. It had penetrated even the clocks. In Basra, the Venice of the East, the heat was unbearable. We lay all day in transit camp as Solnai. The fans were spinning full blast and sweat was rolling off us in hail. Even the locals hid in the shade during the hottest hours. The heat was exacerbated by the high humidity. Such a hothouse atmosphere was unbearable. It was a good thing we left Baghdad at night. It was even hotter in Basra, over 50 degrees, and there was a lot of humidity too. 21 October. At 4 o'clock in the morning, we set off somewhere along the narrow-gauge railway. The steam train only from the third run takes a slight rise after a wooden bridge over the Euphrates. After an hour or two, we stop in a field, and an English officer invites us to transfer to another train equipped specially for traveling through the desert. The passage with luggage was somewhat onerous. In addition, the platform was about 1.5 meters high and had no steps. Our destination was Tehran. The terrain we are traveling through generally retains the character of desert, but increasingly there are settlements with vegetation. We are in Iran. In Avaz, 150 kilometers east of Basra, we were dropped off the train at midday and placed in a transit camp. It was hot again. Again, we were dousing ourselves with sweat in the shade. The swimming pool was our salvation. We did not get out of it till evening. We leave only tomorrow evening. 23rd October. In all my life, I have nowhere seen such appalling poverty as at Awaz, on the river Karun. This river joins the waters of the Euphrates and Tigris 70 kilometers from the Persian Gulf. I looked down from the high bridge. Near the wharf for a small wheeled steamer, people were bustling about. The English sergeant had dissuaded me from going out into the city because of the danger of catching a contagious disease, but I still saw, but did not win. I was struck by the terrible poverty of creatures like humans. It was hard to believe. Men and women, not to mention children, were dressed in filthy rags. People are shouting at each other, hysterically shouting so that you can't make out the words, and this shouting is the normal way of speaking here. Everything is covered in faces, so it's impossible to pass. I took pictures of this human misery, and I was scared. Then I saw stately elders in tattered rags, and with long sticks in their hands tapping on the edge of the pavement. The trachoma is the broom of the East. The blind men. One of them, tall, slender, hairy, looked like Ivan the Baptist. I watched from my seat the 3-meter sharks and sawfish that come in here from the Persian Gulf, and fish for waste. That same evening we left for Tehran. 24 October. In the morning about 9 o'clock we were at Qom, that holy city. The gilded dome of the beautiful mosque shone in the sun and was visible from afar. There seemed to be no end to the mountains, and they were getting higher and higher. There was no vegetation around. As far as the eye could see, bare rocks, 800 kilometers of dead rock. Dead, and the oil that fuels the world. The locals, though, make much less use of this wealth. At 7 o'clock in the evening, we finally reached Tehran. Here we will have to stay for a few days until the convoy is formed. 26 October. The Czechoslovak military attaché, Colonel Lipa, brought us to the stadium, where a sports festival was held in honor of the 26th anniversary of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The results of the exercises on the shells were not bad. As for running, the athletes were very tired at the finish line. Tehran lies at an altitude of 1,200 meters above sea level. There are many Soviet, British, and American servicemen in the city. The United States of America, in cooperation with the Soviet Union, built a large equipment assembly center in Tehran. From here, after assembly, American cars, Studebakers, Dodges, and Willis on their own go to the Eastern Front. When I was photographing the bazaar, I did not notice how suddenly I was surrounded by a far from friendly crowd. I tried to get out of the encirclement as quickly as possible. The bazaar in Tehran is Oriental life in its natural form, unvarnished, with all its unique smells, shouting, trading, gesticulation, dust, and dirt. Here men in turbans and camels laden with puffed-up luggage push their way through the crowd on little patient donkeys. There is a motley mishmash of people of different types and skin tones. Here you will see beautiful national clothes and turbans of the most unusual shapes. Here you will meet with a lively Oriental temperament. All this is an unforgettable spectacle. 1 November. In our homeland, it is the day of commemoration of the deceased. Today people go to the cemetery. By evening, as a rule, it's already freezing. But here we walk around in shorts and a shirt, and the sun is as hot as it is in Czechoslovakia in August. The trees here are always covered with leaves, but in the hottest times the leaves lose their freshness. On the eve of departure we were photographed, a mandatory activity for correspondence before the transport leaves. The photographer was about to press the button, when suddenly the military attaché made an unfortunate joke, saying that he would have to cross out some of us in the photograph with an X when the message about the heroic death came. Who could have known then that the first to go would be the Czech teacher from Karo and the talented poet, Nadporučík Jurek? They did not know that they had 3 weeks and 3 days to live, that they would perish on the Bezimyania heights near Nizhny Komarnik at the capture of the last fascist bastion in the Carpathians. Nor did our 4 other compatriots, pictured on 1 November 1944 in Tehran, know that they would soon follow Jurek. 2 November. We are already at the disposal of the Soviet command, and the cars are driven by Red Army chauffeurs. At noon we leave for Pahlavi, situated on the shore of the Caspian Sea. We go higher and higher up into the mountains, the tops of which go into the clouds. We admire the wild beauty of Elbrus. Volcanic traces can be seen on the rocks. Mountains inspire fear. Some chauffeurs have already paid with their lives for venturesome driving. We drive through a very narrow valley. Sheer cliffs loom over us. Turns over precipices. No barriers and no warning signs. Here and there, small Persian-style villages nestle between the cliffs, and all around are sparse trees stretching to the height of pyramidal poplars. This poor region is beautiful in its own way. We pass a number of Soviet checkpoints and stop at one of them. Until we receive a message that there is no fog ahead, we will not be allowed in. Finally, we receive the news that the fog is not threatening us, and we drive on. After a while, we learned why we had to be so careful. With serpentines, we climb to the highest point of the road, which then passes through a 2-kilometer tunnel under the Elbrus Massif. The tunnel is on Iranian territory and is guarded by Soviet units. The former Shah completely reoriented himself to the policy of the Axis powers as early as 1935. In June 1941, the Shah declared Iran neutral. However, based on justified distrust, on 25 August 1941, Soviet troops entered northern Iran, and the British occupied the southern part of the country. With this, the activities of Hitler's fifth column were foiled. The Shah was forced to give up the throne. We reached the tunnel by 6 o'clock in the evening, And then by puzzling turns for an hour and a half we were sliding down to the sea. Our chauffeur Kozlovsky, the son of a cavalry general, a participant of the 1941 battles near Moscow, showed us during this crazy race down to the 1,000-meter abyss in which a Soviet lieutenant and his driver had recently perished. 3 November. Today we leave Pahlavi. Along the seashore there are orange groves with ripening fruit, tea plantations. Tea was just being harvested. Rice fields, mulberry trees. In the summer residence of the Shah, we marveled at the beautiful tourist gardens. The people here do not make a wretched impression. The women wear trousers. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we loaded on a Soviet steamer of 500 tons displacement. In a small saloon, Soviet people hospitably treat us. Everything is very tasty. Some crew members live and work here with their families. They are simple, kind people, used to the harsh life. A different world begins here. After 9 o'clock in the evening, we go out to the vast expanse of the Caspian Sea. It is greenish in color. During the night, a storm hit us. The vessel was creaking terribly, thrashing from side to side. Water flooded the portholes and penetrated into our cabins, but there were cheerful shouts and laughter on the ship. 5 November. At 8 o'clock in the morning, we enter the port and dock at the breakwater. We are on the Soviet land, in Baku. At last I will see this heroic people of the great Slavic state, the people whom I tried to help as much as I could back in London. We are met by a Soviet military delegation headed by a colonel. After accommodation in a cozy hotel, in tourist, and an official greeting, a hearty breakfast was waiting for us. After lunch, an amateur group of the local garrison gave a concert. We left in the evening at 21 o'clock. We didn't have time to see the city, but by the faces of the locals, Soviet oil workers, we understood well what a long, hard war is. The echo of the war reached the very outskirts of the giant country. The lack of men on the labor front was made up for by women. They are everywhere, with a rifle at the warehouse, at the helm of the ship. They are drivers and carriage drivers on transport, work in clerks' offices, and in oil production. Women wear headscarves tied round their heads, telegoriaks and felt boots. Men wear papaks, ear flaps or caps with a visor. A large number of wounded and disabled war veterans are conspicuous. Tired look of people speaks of malnutrition and lack of sleep. Elderly and middle-aged people speak little. Young people are more talkative. Above the harbor with its numerous ships, one can see a giant statue of Kirov, the glorious son of the revolution. Oil derricks rise right off the coast. The surface of the water in the harbor is covered with a film of oil. We are traveling in a third-class carriage. Each compartment has 6 sleeping places. 3 shelves are fixed rigidly, and 3 are folding. The captain is in charge of our carriage. With him, the intendant, a senior lieutenant, and a few soldiers. We stocked up on food for 15 days. Bread, lard, jam, condensed milk, sausage, butter, cheese, fish, breadcrumbs, sugar, and tea. Boiling water for tea could be taken from railway stations. The sausages are hung from the ceiling of the carriage. We will be on the road for about 12 days. Everything around us is homely and cozy. We left exactly at noon. 6 November. In the morning we wake up in Derbent on the Caspian Sea. At 2 o'clock we are in Makhachkala. It is still the Caspian Sea. The sea is turbulent. Gradually, its greenish surface begins to recede. So far, there are no destructive traces of war visible anywhere, but on people's faces there is an indelible imprint of suffering and everything they have experienced. In the evening, by candlelight, you can talk and dream. It is cloudy. We are traveling by step. In the daytime, we read or learn Russian language. At night, we drove through places east of Grozny, where Soviet troops finally stopped Hitler's offensive. In the evening, already at dusk, we were in Grozny. Now our way will lie through all Russia on the traces of heroic struggle of the Soviet people. 7 November. At 8 o'clock in the morning, we arrived at the Mineralny Vody station. Only walls remained of the station and the neighboring houses. The remains of carriages are scattered around. The Caucasus is crying. The mountains are covered with clouds. No colors of the Caucasian foothills can be seen. It is raining. On the platform, poorly dressed women are wrapped in shawls and shabby sweatshirts. You can see from their faces that they are tired from the long war. Their eyes are hard to describe. These eyes were accusing, in them the horror of the years of war. Those eyes called for vengeance. A chilly girl with no stockings, in big old boots that don't fit her feet, wrapped in a shawl, offers water. Water, which is so plentiful everywhere. And she smiles such a sweet, pure, pitiful smile that I feel uncomfortable at the thought of how she suffers. The faces of women and children. Even the terrible trials of war could not erase from them Slavic softness and tenderness. They speak softly and sing sung-y too. As soon as possible their torment must end. It's drizzling rain, it's cold. On the way to Armavir, we saw a picture of total destruction of the railway park. On both sides of the road on whole kilometers stretched a chain of broken steam locomotives and wagons of all kinds. Steam locomotives bearing the markings Cologne, Kassel, Essen, and Frankfurt are lying with their wheels upside down or on their sides. All this eloquently testifies to the strength of the Soviet Army's offensive. Armavir railway station and the city are destroyed. There are ruins everywhere. Here there were fierce battles. In the evening we arrived in Kropotkin, and then our way lay to the station Tikhoretsk. Soviet officers and the conductor came to us for a talk. We congratulated them on the anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution. 8 November. At 5 o'clock in the morning we arrived at Rostov-on-Don. At noon a Soviet officer took us to the city. It is 3/4 destroyed. The once rich city of millions is now deserted. Now only 200,000 inhabitants are here after a relatively short occupation. The people are quiet, haggard, looking at us with distrust. Prematurely aged women walk past us with frozen faces, without smiles. Crowds of people gather near the railway station. It's hard to say why. Whether they want to go somewhere, or whether they are simply meeting and seeing off the trains that embody life for them. A better life that will come when this war is over. It is only here, in the Soviet Union, that the terrible atrocities of the Nazi regime are fully revealed. Everything suggests that this is where the center of gravity of the struggle against fascism lies. The call, "Everything for the front," is shouted at every railway station, in every village we pass. All this testifies to the firm determination to fight until the complete defeat of the enemy. People gave everything in the name of victory. It was necessary to win this war at all costs to live a better life afterwards. More tanks, more planes, more shells, more efforts both in the rear and at the front. This was the content of this harsh, but the only possible slogan at that time. At 3 o'clock we left Rostov. Almost at dusk the Sea of Azov appeared, and after a short time we saw the lights of Taganrog. Here were fierce battles. We talked in the dark. At 16:30 we arrived at Sinyavskaya. Despite the rain, the women on the platform offer pies, chickens, apples. 9 November. We are traveling along the Donbass. It rains all day long. Everywhere you look there is a plain, a lot of power lines and dumps. This is an industrial area. 10 November. At some completely ruined station a woman said to me, "Your situation is better. You have no children with you, but what is it like for us mothers to watch them tortured and suffering?" She wished me a good journey and sighed deeply. The weather is overcast all the time. 11 November. About 9 o'clock in the morning we stopped at Bilatsyrkva. Here at one time the 1st Czechoslovak Brigade was active. We got out of the carriages to stretch ourselves. The battles were persistent and took place in severe frosts. At noon we left Fastov, and in 2 hours we were already walking along Khreshchetyk in Kiev. Mountains of debris and broken bricks were piled up on both sides of the completely destroyed avenue. The city, which had 1 million inhabitants in peacetime, is now home to no more than 50,000 people. Everything is in need, but Kiev is awakening to a new life. On Lenin Avenue, A 4-year-old boy suddenly ran up to me and clung to my leg with a joyful cry. It threw me into a state of confusion. The boy immediately reminded me of Milan. Excited, I hugged the little boy and put a 10-ruble note in his hand. I had nothing else. He was smiling broadly, his eyes sparkling with mischief. I don't know what made him run up to me, but it touched me, and I remembered him for a long time afterwards. 12 November, Sunday. Rainy. We passed through Korostin, Novograd-Volynski, Shepetavka, and Ternopil, and after a short stop in Lvov went on. The closer we got to the front, the slower the trains went. In Dobromel, we stood for several hours again. This region reminds me of the Beskids. The bluish coniferous forests scattered over the snow-covered mountains bring back memories of home. Opposite us stands an ambulance train. My bronchitis is treated with pure alcohol. Because of the burnt mucous membranes, I could not eat for almost a week afterwards. The next day, it was a glorious evening. The sun gilded the blood-yellow and fiery red autumn leaves on a nearby hill. There was peace and tranquility in nature. At night, in the pitch darkness, we trod onwards. Thus, we traveled from station to Gurov, and then the train started towards Sanok. At 7 o'clock in the morning, a Czechoslovak trumpeter played an excellent revival. We were in Krasno. Here was the reserve regiment of the 1st Czechoslovak Army Corps in the USSR. And for the first time something foreign came to my ears that I had never heard before. It came from somewhere from the west, lost and then gained strength again, like a fire which flares up, then dampens its rage, then flares up again. Gradually I began to realize that this distant rumble was artillery firing, that we were already at the front. There was something formidable in these pulsating rumblings, bringing death, as if some huge unknown force was settling scores with people, playing with their fates and destroying them without regret. And those on the other side, curled up in the trenches, had a far from enviable fate, and in this they had themselves to blame. They should not have got involved here. They would have stayed at home, instead of spreading all over Europe. At noon we went by car to the village of Remenovzdroj. There we'll wait for the court commander, General Svoboda. Then we climbed the Carpathian mud, drowning up to our shins. The general said by telephone that there was a battle going on, and therefore he could not come, but invited us to his command post at 20 o'clock. At 8 o'clock in the evening I saw General Svoboda for the first time. Our distant journey was over. A new, fighting life was beginning. The struggle for freedom.